welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Emily, and this is my channel where I like to talk all about the cozy, wholesome books that I have been reading. Today I have another monthly reading wrap-up video for you. Today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in November, and let me think. Okay. It's just a bit of a whirlwind. I just put my toddler down for his nap. I've got baby down here. So I'm just trying to squeeze in this video quickly. It's December 2nd, and this is like the earliest in the month I think that I've been able to film one of these in a good while. So I'm trying to take advantage of it. As always with these videos, I don't count how many books I read total in each month. I calculate that all up on January 1st of the new year, and we are getting close to that. And I am very excited about it because I feel like I've had a pretty solid reading year. But let's dive into the books that I read. So I still ended up reading a lot of Betty Neels this month. I still love her just as much. I'm not going to go into it too much because I talked about it a good deal in my last reading wrap-up video. The one thing I did want to mention is that, or a couple more things that I have found that I really like about it, is that Betty Neels is so good at writing like manipulative characters, and she writes some of this is something that's I find from Patricia Wentworth as well, who's one of my all-time favorite authors. Just their skill at writing those like horrible manipulative people is so uncomfortable to read. And it's so nice when either A, they get murdered if you're reading a Patricia Wentworth book, or B, in a Betty Neels book, when the handsome Dutch doctor or British doctor or just handsome doctor in general swoops in and saves the day. But yeah, it just, there's been a couple books that I've read where it's like there's a sister character that's like this horrible manipulative person, or like the mom, and it's just, ooh, it's kind of hard to read sometimes. Because in my mind, if I think about it, the most evil and worst villain of all is somebody that's super manipulative. Like, I would almost rank that, like, this might sound a little bit weird, but I would almost rank it above, like, a murderer person. Because at least with a murderer, they put their victim out of their misery sort of a thing. Like, I don't think murderers are good people. Let me clarify this here. But I just hate manipulative people so much. So much. Sometimes reading some of the books with like the super manipulative people in them, it's really challenging for me. And then some of those obviously probably part of my just life experience and stuff. But there's that, and then I feel like there's something else that I wanted to say about the Betty Neels books, but I can't think of it. So I'm still loving them. They're still so much fun. They're still such a refreshing thing to be reading right now. I've had a lot of sleep deprivation this last month, just with this child wanting to be up and nursing nonstop all night. So I'm very tired these days. So focusing on a very simple, light, fluffy Betty Neels book is exactly what I need. So I mostly read Betty Neels books this month, but I did try out a couple of other books. I read a book called A True Gentleman by M.A. Nichols, and I believe this is the first book in a series. From what I understand, M.A. Nichols has written a whole ton of books, and they're all kind of in the same world, but then there's different series within those groups. And I read that, I finished it on November 4th, and so I don't remember much about it. So let me look it up real fast and just refresh my memory on that. Okay, now I remember. So this is a story about Tabby Russell and Captain Graham Ashbrook are the two main characters in it. Tabby married a guy years before the beginning of the book, and he is kind of a horrible person. Not kind of, he's a horrible person. And so she has her son, and because her husband is a horrible person and he's like, oh, I'm a gentleman, so I can't get a job. He makes his wife go out and get a job because he's a horrible person. And so she goes and gets a job as a housekeeper / nursemaid to Captain Graham, who was in the Navy, and he is convalescing at home. He is bound and determined to get back to the Navy, but he's really, really badly injured. And so she kind of comes to be a housekeeper / nursemaid for him, and you know, eventually there's romance and all of that stuff. This is a spice-free, like, wholesome, closed door, all that sort of a thing. I think there's maybe a kiss in it, so there's nothing inappropriate. It was pretty good. It was kind of hard to read sometimes about Tabby's husband, just because he's an awful person, and she was having, because of his horribleness, she was having to, like, leave her 3-year-old son at home with his drunkard of a father and go out to work because, and it was kind of hard to get through for some of that, because it was just awful. It was so bad. So I enjoyed the writing overall. I thought it was pretty good. I'm not in any huge rush to read the rest of the books in the series, but that's just because of the mood that I'm in. I think that it would be a series that I would really enjoy reading. So I'm definitely going to keep it in mind going forward, because there's a whole, like I said, I think there's like 10, 15 books or something. Like, there's a lot of books, and they're just all in this whole same world. So I think it would be kind of fun to read it, and then you kind of get to see the different characters from different books like pop up. That one I read Kit McBride Gets a Wife by Amy Berry, and this one was okay. The main girl character in it, not the main girl character. So basically there's a bunch of brothers that live up on the mountain, and they have one sister whose name is Junebug, and they're all the McBrides, and Junebug decides that since she's a lazy person, and I shouldn't say that. I did not like Junebug. She really, really annoyed me. She was kind of obnoxious, and she kind of was lazy and rude, and just not my favorite type of a character. Some people would probably really like her and describe her as, like, spunky and blah blah blah, but I didn't like her. She just really annoyed me. But anyway, she decides that because her brothers are just so rude and making her help with stuff around the house and cook meals and stuff, that she needs help. And so she writes for a mail order bride for one of her brothers. And she writes really, like, honest advertisements where she just kind of lists out a bunch of his pros and cons, like faults and things. And so then through a series of adventures, Maddie, who is an Irish girl, she came over from Ireland, and she got stuck working for this super lazy, not very nice lady. She gets abandoned in this town in Montana, and so she ends up sort of accidentally taking the place for the mail order bride. And it kind of goes on from there. It was okay. It wasn't my favorite. There was a lot of that whole, like, Insta lust thing, which I just dislike. And there's this one bit where they're talking about Junebug and Maddie are having to help two of the brothers, Kit and what's the older brother's name? I can't remember. Help, like, rub their hands and feet after going outside in a snowstorm to make sure they don't get frostbite. And then she's, like, describing Kit McBride's feet and stuff, and I'm just like, and how, like, sexy they were, and, like, how seductive this whole thing was, and blah, blah, blah. Gross. It was gross. It was just, no. Not my cup of tea. No thank you. I was just like, ugh. So, I think that if I remember correctly, there was one, like, romance love scene, whatever, in there. I skipped over it. It was kind of at that point where it was not my favorite book, but it was like, I was at the point in the book where I didn't want to just, like, not finish it, so I was, like, trying to hurry up and finish it. It was okay. I would probably give it, like, a 3 stars, maybe. Junebug really irritated me a lot. So, there's that. But yeah, so it was an okay book, and it's apparently, I think there's a second book in this series. Morgan, that was the oldest brother's name. I know it started with an M. I think there's a second book in the series that's about him, but I have no interest in reading it, so I will not be reading it. I read the book because there's a lady that I follow who does a knitting podcast on YouTube, and she randomly mentioned that she had just picked it up, and the premise sounded so good. It sounded like a Seven Brides for Seven Brothers sort of a vibe, which if you're not familiar, that's a vintage movie back from the 50s maybe, that has Jane Powell and Howard Keel, and I love that movie. I've seen it so many times. So much fun. So I was kind of excited. I was like, oh, this sounds like a similar vibe to that. It's not. It was horrible. Well, it wasn't horrible, but it was not that fun to read. So I was glad when I was done with it. Basically, this is why I ended up reading a lot more Betty Neels again, because I felt like every single book that I was trying to branch out and read something different just was not my favorite. So I was like, well, Betty Neels it is. The next one that was not a Betty Neels book was a Mr. Gardiner and the Governess by Sally Britton. This is the first in a series, and it was pretty good. It's about, oh gosh, I can't remember their first names. I've just read so many books by this point that the names all get mixed up. But Mr. Gardiner is a young man who is working for the Duke of something something, and he is basically cataloging all of the plants and like bugs and insects that are in the Duke's massive garden. And the main girl, whose name I can't remember, she is a governess for the Duke's children, and they interact and meet and so on and so forth. And honestly, I quite enjoyed this one because it was very like slice of life almost. It kind of reminded me in a lot of ways of like a D.E. Stevenson book, where there was nothing too like dramatic or like horrible or whatever that happens. It was fairly even keel sort of a thing. Very chill and calm and all of that. And so I actually quite enjoyed that. It was just like normal people living their lives and going forth from there. So I did really like it. I am planning to read more in the series. I just got distracted and haven't gotten back to it. So I do recommend it. It was fun. It was another one of those closed door, wholesome romances. It's nice. I enjoyed it. So there's that one. Then Healing the Mountain Man's Heart by Misty M. Beller was another one that I read that was not a Betty Neels. It's kind of funny because it'll be like a Betty Neels book, non-Betty Neels book, Betty Neels, non-Betty Neels, Betty Neels, Betty Neels. Like I've been going in between, so it's kind of funny. This is a story of it was another mail order bride story. I don't know exactly. I think I saw this one I think it was like Kindle Unlimited or something, and I just happened to see it, and so I was like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. Maybe this one will have more of the Seven Brides for Seven Brothers vibe. Yes and no. It was better than Kit McBride Gets a Wife. Basically what's her name? It was on the tip of my tongue. The sister's name is Naomi. What's the main girl's name? I can't remember what it is. We'll see if it comes back to me. But basically, Naomi has had an unfortunate circumstance occur where she was seduced by a man back home, and she's pregnant, so she and her sister answer a mail order bride advertisement and head to, is it Montana again? Or is it like, it's like Wyoming or something. I can't remember for sure. Somewhere like way out west. And they get there, and right when they get there, because the main girl, I wish I could remember her name. She's a doctor. She worked for their dad, who was a doctor. And so when they get there and an accident happens to one of the brothers, there are a bunch of brothers that are living on this farm up in the woods. An accident happens to one of the brothers, so she has to help out and whatnot. And so then she basically saves this guy's life because she's a doctor and they're in the middle of nowhere. And so they get back to the cabin, and then they find out that none of the brothers had written the advertisement. It was their niece and nephew who had written it. Because it's a bunch of brothers, like 5 brothers, I think, and then their niece and nephew. are living there. And they find out the niece and nephew wrote it because they wanted a mother figure, basically. And so then the brothers are like, fine, you girls can stay for a little while, but then you have to leave. And Naomi is very heavily pregnant, like very, very pregnant. She's like 2 months out or something. And so a bunch of stuff happens, blah, blah, blah. Like, of course, the main girl and the main guy are falling in love and all this different stuff. It was okay. It had promise until like the last quarter of the book, and then it just really annoyed me. It kind of tanked the whole rest of the book for me to some degree. It was this whole thing. It's a Christian romance, but it was like this whole thing about like because Jonah, the main guy, has basically cloistered his family off up in the mountains because they're mining sapphires, and so he's trying to like keep them away from all the rest of the people and protect them and keep his family all safe, and so he doesn't let them like go out and have friends, and they don't invite people over to their mountain or to their ranch or anything like that. And so it comes up as a point of contention because I'm gonna have to look it up because it's gonna drive me crazy that I can't remember the main lady's name. 1 second. Okay, excuse me. The main guy's name is Jericho, and the main lady's name is Dinah. That's what it was. So it ends up, so Jericho is the one who's like trying to protect all of his brothers and his niece and nephew and everything and not let him go anywhere. And so then Dinah starts like preaching to him that he needs to like trust God more and be better about it and all this stuff, and that they can't get married if he can't trust God. And so because he says that he can't open up the mountain and let people come and blah blah blah. So she decides to leave the next day with her, like, a period. They've been on this ranch for like several months or whatever. I guess I should say that this is spoilers. Okay, so I can't really tell you exactly why I dislike this book without going into some spoilers. So I will have here on the screen, if you're wanting to read this book, I will have here on the screen when I'm done with the spoilers, and then you can just skip by it. And if you have no interest in reading the book, you can listen to the spoilers. So Jericho has a thing where he just will not let people up on the mountain, and he's trying to protect his family, and he promised his dad on his dad's deathbed that he would keep the family safe. And so he's just trying to like do the right thing, sort of thing. And so then Dinah at the end is just like, how could you? Like, because basically they're going to get married, or they're in love with each other, and he has proposed to her, and she's like, I can't marry you because it's my calling and my purpose in life to be a doctor. I have to be a doctor, and so I can't stay here with you on the ranch and marry you because you won't let people come to the ranch. And how can I be a doctor if you won't let people come to the ranch? Like, this whole thing, like, it was so annoying. And so then instead of being like, okay, we're going to give it a week or two, like we're going to wait a little bit of time and like all this stuff, she decides to leave the next day. Like, they've been on this ranch for like 6 weeks or a couple months or something. Like, her sister's getting close to like popping this baby out. And so instead of thinking about her sister a little bit more and being kinder and whatnot, she's all like, I have to be a doctor. We have to leave. And so she drags her poor, very heavily pregnant sister off of the mountain, away from a safe place to have a baby. And then, of course, her sister starts going into labor on the trail. And so then this whole thing, like, it annoyed me so much. I was just like, what kind of a sister are you? Like, that's just cruel. How could you? And then she got like so preachy about like how Jericho needed to trust God more also. And it really tanked the book for me. I really disliked it. So, if you couldn't tell. So because of that, I have no interest in continuing on with the series. So I will probably ignore it from here on forth. But yeah. That's all the spoilers, and that's pretty much everything that I have to say about that book. It was okay. Again, it had so much promise for me, and then it did not fulfill that. And then we come to the last non-Betty Neels book that I read, and my favorite read of November. Just a minute, I need to talk about this book. He's protesting. He's getting close to being ready for a nap, so he's protesting. Then we come to my favorite book of the month, and probably one of my top favorite books of the year. Like, I love this book so much. So much. I can't remember exactly how I heard about this. If it was a comment that somebody left, or if it was a suggested book that was similar to another book that I had read. I can't remember exactly. But the book is called Before I Saw You by Emily Houghton, something like that. And it is amazing. It is so good. It's the story of two people, a guy and a girl, of course, because it's a contemporary romance. I forgot to mention that part. Probably the best contemporary romance I've ever read, if I'm honest. I loved it so much. So it's a story of Alfie and Alice, and Alfie was in a really bad car accident and lost his leg, so he's been recovering in the hospital, and Alice was in a horrible office fire, and so her face and a bunch of the rest of her body got terribly burned. So she's also recovering in the hospital, and they're in the same ward, and they end up being put in beds next to each other, they're in the two separate beds, but the beds are next to each other. And Alice, because she has these horrible burns on her face, is super self-conscious, and she doesn't want to see anybody, so she keeps the curtains closed around her bed at all time. And she and Alfie start talking, and basically they haven't ever seen each other because Alice won't let anybody see her. And so they start interacting and just telling each other all these like different things and stuff, and like falling in love over time without having seen each other, and just talking to each other. And just the whole book was so good. It was so like human. Like, there were so many broken things that happened to particularly Alice, and just really sad, tragic things that happened with Alfie, and the accident that he was involved in and everything. And it was just raw and lovely, like the way that they interacted. And I love Alfie. He was just so... He reminded me a lot of one of my brother-in-laws, actually. He was just so upbeat and positive, but that was kind of, in some ways, like a show to hide how much he'd been hurt in a lot of ways. And it just... Oh, I feel like I can't do justice describing it, but it was lovely. The different characters and the different friendships. There's an old man that's also on the ward, Mr. Peterson, I think, and he and Alfie go back and forth. Like, he's like your quintessential like grouchy old man, and of course he loves Alfie, but he's never gonna like admit that. And it's just the banter and the witty remarks and things that were back and forth, and Alfie was just, he's just so funny. Like, he's coaxing and trying to convince Alice to like come out of her shell a bit more and all of that. And it was just so amazing. After I had finished reading it, I went on Goodreads, because I think I was looking it up to like send it to my sister or something. I can't remember for sure. I was looking at some of the reviews, and it was so funny how so many people were saying they hated how it ended. I loved how it ended, which is not normal. Normally I'm the one that's saying I hate how it ended, and everybody else is like, this is so good. But I loved how it ended. I thought it was absolutely perfect. I just could not more highly recommend it. And I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler here, so if you're interested in reading this book, I'll put it on the screen. Skip past this, but I really just have to talk about the ending for a second. So basically, Alfie gets out of the hospital before Alice does, and he still hasn't seen her, and she makes him promise that he won't come and visit her, or anything like that. I'm trying not to give all of the details away. Like, I don't want to give everything away. But, and so he doesn't know how she's doing, like what's going on with her, where she is, and all of that. And so she finally like works up the strength and guts to go and visit him and meet him, and it ends with him like taking her hand and just being like, what took you so long? And I love that. And then there's an epilogue, and the epilogue was probably one of my all-time favorite epilogues. I thought it was so good. It ends with Alice is having a baby and they've been married, and I just love that because I feel like a lot of times in epilogues, particularly or like in contemporary books like this, they, you know, it'll be like a few years later and they may or may not be married. Usually it's like they're still dating or something, and I love the fact that this one, they were actually married. They had been married for a few years, and it ends with she's having a baby, and I just loved that. I loved it so much. Because yeah, you don't see that all the time in books. It's almost like a lot of times in contemporary books they treat like getting married and having babies and things like that as the end of the world. Like you would never want to do that ever. And so I really appreciated that it considered that as a positive thing. And it was just very sweet. So highly, highly recommend it. It was such a good read. And it's one of those books that I very much want to own a physical copy of it because I just loved it. So that's all that I have to talk about for books for this month. Like I said, I read several other Betty Neels books, but we're not going to go into those. I've gushed about her enough. But I've read several of her books. I found some new favorites of her books, and I'm currently reading yet another one of her books. I love her writing and everything about it, so I'm very much enjoying my Betty Neels phase. That's all the books that I have to talk about this month. I'm hoping to maybe read a few like cozy Christmassy books this month, so I would love to know if you have any like good Christmas romance, or not even necessarily romance, slice of life, English village, murder mystery, those sorts of things. If you have any Christmassy books that you would recommend, I would really love to hear it. I'm almost done, Papa. I'm almost done. I've been having a little bit of trouble finding something that I think would fit my sort of wholesome, cozy book requirements. So if you have any recommendations, I would love it if you shared it with me. I've been loving reading all of your comments. Like I've said previously, I'm not very good at answering them right now, just because it takes me so much time to just sit down and do that. And between this one and the toddler, I just don't have time for it. But I love reading them. Thank you so much for everyone that leaves comments. I also wanted to do a special shout out to, I can't remember the commenter name because I haven't looked at it, but one of you lovely viewers recommended that since I was a Betty Neels fan, that there is a blog website that's called The Uncrushable Jersey Dress, and it's all about Betty Neels. And there's a really fun, like, spreadsheet that's part of it where it details all like the age gaps and which ones have the rich Dutch doctor and which ones have the rich British doctor, and thank you so much for recommending that. It just brought me so much joy. I was laughing so much and like telling my husband about it, and it just, I thoroughly enjoyed perusing the website. So thank you very much for that recommendation. I really appreciated it. It was nice to know that even though I've never heard of Betty Neels before until this year, that there are plenty of people who have. Yeah, there are plenty of people who have heard of her and love her books just as much as I do. So yeah, anyway, I need to get this one down for his nap. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!